Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. My name is Devin Stockwell. Ukraine update, day 800. And tonight we're joined by newly elected SNP MP, Seamus Logan. Good evening, Seamus.
Good evening, Dennis.
Ukraine update, day 882. Ukraine has said its drones attacked a Russian ship used for military cargo moored at Kavzak in Russia's Krasnodar region across the Kerch Strait from illegally occupied Crimean Ukrainian armed forces. Said the occupier ship is severely damaged in the Kavzak port and posted a picture of black smoke rinsing from the vessel on fire. Ukraine has once again asked the Pentagon to lift restrictions on firing US weapons at military targets on Russian soil. The Ukrainian Defence Minister Rustem Umerov and his US counterpart Lloyd Austin on Tuesday held their first talks since Joe Biden's announcement that he was ending his presidential re-election bid. Volodymyr Zelensky's Chief of Staff Andriy Yermak has spoken by phone call with Phil Gordon, National Security Advisor to Kamala Harris. The presumptive Democratic nominee for the US President. The Ukrainian President office said they discussed the situation at the front and Russia's campaign of aerial attacks on Ukrainian cities and energy infrastructure. Zelensky highlighted in the nightly video address that Harris had represented the US at the June Peace Summit in Switzerland. President Zelensky had praised Vatican efforts in seeking peace and securing the release of prisoners of war after the Vatican Secretary of State Cardinal Pietro Parolin visited 4 cities in Ukraine. Zelensky said talks with the Pope's second in charge focused on what can be done with this year to bring closer a just peace for Ukraine. Ukraine's Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba said after arriving in Beijing that it was important for Ukraine and China, an ally of Russia, to have direct dialogue and exchange of positions about plans to resolve the conflict in Ukraine. A Spanish court has sentenced pensioner Pompeo González Pascual to 18 years in prison over letter bombs sent to Spain's Prime Minister, the US, and Ukrainian embassies and arms makers in 2022. A court in Moscow said it had found Russian journalist Mikhail Zygar guilty in absentia to knowingly disturbingly false information and sentenced him to 8.5 years in prison. Zygar had written about war crimes committed by Russian forces in the Ukrainian town of Bucha near Kiev. Hungary has said it is blocking European Peace Facility funding for Ukraine until the government in Kiev allows Russian oil to resume flowing through its territory. Slovakia and Hungary said this month that they have stopped receiving oil from Lukoil through the Druzhba pipeline after Ukraine imposed a ban. Estonia's incoming Prime Minister Kirsten Michal has pledged continued support for Ukraine until victory against Russia. Michal replaced Kaja Kallas after she resigned to become the EU's foreign policy chief. Michal said Estonia would also increase its own defence expenditure. So Seamus, I will just bring you in. Good evening again. My first question is to you. Do you think Kamala Harris is, at this point, a more suitable ally to Ukraine than maybe President Biden or Donald Trump?
Well, it's a good question. It remains to be seen, really. I do think there is a difference between the two political groups in America, and certainly the Democrats have shown themselves to be strong allies. I think from where I'm sitting in London, what was interesting today was that the leader of the opposition, Rishi Sunak, and the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, were both on the same page with regard to the UK's continued support for Ukraine in its attempts to resist the Russian invasion. Now, I'm only going to give you a very personal view, but I think at some point this conflict is going to have to end, and the sooner the better. And with all conflict resolution, both sides are going to have to consider a bit of give and take. And that's something we haven't seen yet in any of the various efforts that have been made to bring the two sides together to begin to discuss some sort of peace process. But as I say, and I deal with neighbor disputes and that type of thing. This is a dispute between nations, and it's quite clear the Russians are the aggressors, of course, make no mistake about that. But there is going to have to be some negotiation at some stage to bring this bloody conflict to an end. But we stand firm with Ukraine and with the Ukrainian people because they are the victims in this war.
Moving on to the Israel and Gaza latest. At least 39,145 Palestinians have been killed and 90,257 wounded in Gaza since October 7th. The Palestinian Health Ministry said on Wednesday a total of 55 Palestinians have been killed and 110 wounded in the past 24 hours. The ministry said in a statement, the Israeli military has launched a fresh attack on the southern city of Gaza, in the southern Gaza city of Khan Yunis, killing at least 70 people according to medics. After ordering Palestinians to leave, several neighbourhoods, including areas that have been designated by the military as part of a humanitarian zone. Lebanese armed group Hezbollah broadcast drone video on Wednesday that it said showed air defence facilities, planes and fuel storage units at Israel's Ramat David Air Base, nearly 50 kilometres into Israeli territory. Pro-Palestinian demonstrators have blocked entrance to the Foreign Office in London in protest at the perceived failure of the new Labour government to do more to change UK policy towards Israel's offensive in Gaza. As many as 300 people sealed off access to the Foreign Office on Wednesday morning with a large banner saying "Genocide made in Britain." Protesters said 6 demonstrators had been arrested. Police arrested 9 people during the protest. Protests are happening in Washington DC over the arrival of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, including a sit-in at the Congressional Office building that ended with multiple arrests, according to the Associated Press. Elon Musk has said SpaceX chief executive Elon Musk has said that his startups in Israel, the Gulf Arab state foreign minister Sheikh Abdullah bin Zayed thanked Musk for supporting the United Arab Emirates field hospital in Gaza, where many medical facilities have been demolished and medicines are scarce. Doctors in the largest city in Gaza's southern city of Khan Yunis yesterday pledged for supply from a facility overwhelmed by wounded people. An Israeli airstrike, artillery fire and fighting on the streets continued. There's no space for more patients. There's no space in the operating theatre. There is lack of medical supplies, so we cannot save our patients. Mohammed Zakwat, the director of Nasser Hospital, told the AFP. The UN's Office for Humanitarian Affairs said that the hospital was facing a new max casualty influx amid a dire lack of blood units, medical supplies and hospital beds. The German government has banned a Hamburg-based organisation accused of promoting the Iranian leadership ideology supporting Lebanon's Hezbollah militant group. Police raided 53 properties around the country. The Palestinian Authority budget deficit is projected to surge by 172% in 2024 compared to 2023, according to a statement from the Cabinet on Tuesday. Revenues are also expected to drop by 21% due to the ongoing conflict in Gaza. The announcement followed President Mahmoud Abbas's approval of the emergency budget for 2024, which included austerity measures such as reducing salaries, operational and capital expenditures, and maintaining minimal development expenditures. So Seamus, after listening to all that report there, what kind of severe steps now can have to be taken because to kind of ensure like a ceasefire, because um, it just seems to be getting a lot worse rather than getting better anytime soon.
Yeah, look, thing is, Dennis, it's the same old story, isn't it? As soon as political events in other places take the attention of the news media, this war seems to escalate in the background. And certainly political developments in America and here in the UK have been commanding more attention. But as you rightly said in that report, the slaughter goes on. It's a misnomer to call this a war. It's not a war. This is an attack on a civilian population by a very well armed army, and that's a very, very different thing. The solution has been set out by my party, the SNP, for months now, and there are basically three things that need to happen. First of all, there needs to be an immediate ceasefire. Immediate ceasefire. Secondly, the UK must clearly state its intention to declare recognition for the state of Palestine. That's the first step along the route to a two-state solution. The Republic of Ireland has shown leadership here by recognising the Palestinian state, and the UK should follow. And the third thing that needs to happen, and it needs to happen contemporaneously with these other things, is that the UK should cease arms sales to Israel. Now, I know these things may not be popular in some quarters, and we also should recognise that Israel did suffer tremendously on October the 7th. But that said, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try to bring this to an end, and the SNP have been very strongly focused on achieving that goal over the last lot of months.
New Labour MP Torsten Bell said Labour will fail in government if it does not reduce inequality. Torsten Bell, the former head of the Resolution Foundation and one of Labour's rising stars, has said that the party will have failed in government if it does not reduce inequality, even as the Prime Minister faces a bitter internal battle over a key poverty reduction measure. Newly elected Labour MPs said the UK's long-standing economic problems could not be solved by economic growth alone. His comments come amid a row over where Labour should end the two-child benefit cap immediately, with 7 MPs losing the whip on Tuesday night after voting for a Scottish National Party amendment to do so. Bell did not rebel despite criticism of the cap, both as an independent economist and as a Labour candidate. All the 37 Scottish Labour MPs voted against the SNP's amendment, despite Scottish Labour leader Anna Sauer and his candidates having said that they support getting rid of the two-child cap. Apologies. New analysis by the House of Commons Library shows an estimated 87,100 children in Scotland live in households hit by the two-child cap over the last year, with a total of 1,486,760 children hit across the UK. First Minister John Swinney has made eradicating child poverty one of the Scottish Government's four priorities, with policies such as the Scottish Child Payment helping to keep 100,000 children out of poverty this year. Seamus, obviously John Swinney saying there that poverty is one of his big kind of things in this Parliament. So what is this something Labour should be kind of maybe looking at and taking their own idea off, taking their own idea?
Well, of course, Dennis, and it's hard not to get really passionate and worked up about this, to be perfectly honest with you, because here we sit amid the pomp and the privilege of the Westminster estate in the heart of one of the richest cities, in the heart of one of the richest countries, and yet so many of our children, especially in Scotland, obviously, are living in poverty. It's in total disgrace. Now, down to some facts, Dennis. The gentleman you quote, Torsten Bell, said in 2024 that the limit has to go. The costs are real. What did he do last night? He voted to retain the cap. He voted against the SNP amendment. So did Kim Johnson, who had threatened a couple of weeks ago that she was going to vote against the government. Suella Braverman, who spoke out this week about the two-child cap, abstained. So there's a lot of people, beating their breasts and saying it has to go, but actually not putting their money where their mouth is, as it were. So, thing is, I do accept at face value the Labour politicians' desire to get rid of the two-child cap, but it's not good enough to say that it'll be some time in the future whenever this task force decides that it should be done. It needs to be done now. And I'm sorry for getting angry about it, but I do get angry when I know about children who don't have enough food in their tummies going to bed at night, or don't have shelter over their heads, or don't have enough decent clothing to go to school in. It's shameful in the UK in 2024. This is the thing that I get most worked up about. So we've got to see a change of direction here. We've got to see something done about this immediately. But as my colleague Kirsty Blackman has said, and she told the government in a speech recently, even if they're not going to lift the two-child cap, they could immediately get rid of this notorious rape clause that requires women to fill out a number of pages on a form to demonstrate that they've been raped in order to qualify for the third child benefit. It's disgraceful, and this is a so-called Labour government, a so-called socialist government. They should be ashamed of themselves, and that's what you shouted across the chamber at them last night when some of them cheered when they won the vote. We shouted, shame on you, and that's the truth.
Charities call on the UK government to overhaul benefits to tackle child poverty. UK government ministers have been urged to reform the benefit system to tackle child poverty after a report found it to be a major cause of mental illness that casts a shadow over the young people's well-beings. The report by the Centre of Mental Health, Save the Children UK and Children and Young People's Mental Health Coalition found that the number of people living in poverty in the UK has increased to 4.3 million, while 1 in 5 children and young people aged between 8 and 24 had diagnosable mental health problems. Children from the poorest families were 4 times most likely to have a mental health issue rather than most of the most affluent backgrounds, the report found. The charities recommend the government overhaul of the benefit system to reduce the child poverty, introduce mental health support teams across every school in England, expand free school meals provision to all children in the households in the receipt of universal credits, and lock the yearly increase of the free school meals allowance to inflation. The study comes as Keir Starmer faced increased pressure to scrap the two-child benefit limit, as research found that it would lift 250,000 children out of poverty and therefore have implications for their mental health. Seamus, what kind of overhauls would you like to see in our benefit system? I know we just spoke briefly before about the vote last night, but is there anything kind of more radical measures?
Well, it's kind of difficult for me, Dennis, to pass comment on matters that are largely devolved to the Scottish Government. What I'll be focusing on is trying to ensure that we get the resources under the Barnett formula to ensure that Scotland can deliver on the policies that they've set out. I mean, you've rightly pointed to the Scottish Child Payment, which, as far as I'm aware, benefits somewhere in the region of 329,000 children in Scotland. And that's meant that are over 100,000 children who otherwise would be in poverty are not in poverty. So that's a real game changer, the Scottish Child Payment. I'm not going to comment in detail on matters that are devolved to Holyrood. It wouldn't be appropriate. All I can say is that we'll continue to fight for the resources that we need to get to the Scottish Government.
The King Charles is set to be given a huge £450 million pay rise with an increase of more than 50% of his annual income, official counts reveal. Profits of £1.1 billion from the Crown Estate, a percentage on which funds the monarchy, mean the sovereign grant which supports the official duties of the royal family will raise from £86 million in 2024-25 to £132 million in 2025-26. The monarchy currently receives 12% of the Crown Estate profits to fund its work, as well as funds to the 10-year £360 million renovation of Buckingham Palace. Royal aides said that the increase will be used to complete the palace resurfacing programme by 2027. The sovereign grant will be reviewed in 2026-2027 to reassess the amount of handed over to the palace and ensure it has an appropriate level. Royal accounts also show that the Prince of Wales received £23.6 million income from his Duchy of Cornwall in his first full year after inheriting the full land and property and owning estate from his father. Charles' increased income follows a more than doubling of profits for the Crown Estate, the national portfolio of historical and commercial landholdings, to £1.1 billion in 2023-24, up from £443 million the previous year. This was driven by proceeds from the sales of option leases on offshore wind projects on the seabed surrounding England and Wales. The Crown Estate, as legal owner of the seabed, has responsibility for auctioning offshore wind rights. The Crown Estate's Chief Executive Dan Labad will receive a pay increase of almost 20%, taking his pay packet to almost £1.9 million from the last financial year. In Scotland, the Crown estimates are devolved. The Crown Estates are devolved, and all net profits generated by the Crown Estate Scotland go to the Scottish Government to be useful for public spending. Seamus, does this kind of seem like, excuse me, like something that's almost moral? Does this seem that this sort of pay increases to these people should be happening, and given what we've been talking about earlier with poverty and inequality?
So, Dennis, yes, that there are moral questions here, of course, but look, let me sort of set out a few other kind of contextual issues. I was widely quoted to have had a dig at the monarchy during my swearing-in ceremony here a couple of weeks back. That's not true. I didn't have a dig at the monarchy. I just happen to be someone who believes in the Republican ideal. In other words, I would rather we didn't have a monarchy. I would rather we had an elected head of state. That doesn't mean to say that I don't respect people who are monarchists and who want to retain the monarchy. I have complete respect for those people. All I ask is that they respect my desire to live without the monarchy. And these figures that you're sharing tonight kind of demonstrate the paradox of the almost obscene wealth of the Crown, while at the same time the previous topic concerned benefits and child poverty. It just does not seem morally correct that we live in such a world. Coming back to Scotland, the profits from the Crown Estate do go to the public purse. But riddle me this, Dennis. Why is it and how is it that the seabed out to a certain distance from the coast of Scotland is owned by the Crown Estate? How did that come about? Who granted them that authority to be able to, for example, sell licenses for wind farms or oil exploration or whatever, and that money should go to the Crown Estate? So bottom line is, if you're a monarchist, fine, no issue with that. I just happen to be of a different opinion. And if I had my way, we would abolish the monarchy and we would elect a head of state. Simple.
Shoplifting in England and Wales at a new 20-year high. The number of shoplifting offences recorded by police in England and Wales has risen to a new 20-year high. A total of 443,995,000 offences were logged by forces in the year to March 2024, up to 30% on the 342,420 recorded the previous year. The figure is in the highest since the current records began in the year to March 2003, according to the ONS, the Office for National Statistics, which describes the latest increase as notable. Shoplifting levels had already reached a 20-year high earlier this year, with the latest figures showing the number of offences recorded has risen even higher. The data published on Wednesday comes after leading retailers raised concerns about the rising cost of theft, and as the Labour government vowed to tackle low-level shoplifting and make assaulting a shop worker a specific criminal offence. The move to create a separate offence follows a long-running campaign from business owners amid rising violence against shop workers. Retailers have said they hope the measures set out last week in the King's speech to Parliament will make it easier for police to investigate and prosecute criminals. Shoplifting figures for Scotland published in June were at a 10-year high, and on a per capita basis are roughly in line with this in England and Wales. Charities working in the field of poverty and derivation say they are unsurprised by the figures, as some people find themselves in desperate financial circumstances and have been turning to theft to provide food and essentials for their families. So Seamus, excuse me, I'll bring you back in. Is this almost like a last resort idea for families? Because of course, no one wants to be going out stealing stuff, but the financial situation we find ourselves in, is this just kind of last resort?
Well, Dennis, that's an interesting observation. Look, what I should say is that clearly shoplifting is illegal; it's a crime, and the SNP recognise that. But what I don't think is always recognised, particularly by retailers, is that there is a context and a cause, and it's the root cause that we should be thinking about. And yes, Dennis, I agree. It is poverty driven, and for some families, yes, it is the option of last resort. But there are a number of other factors involved here. First of all, the reluctance of the police recently to prosecute what they regard as thefts below a certain value. I'm not so sure that was such a sensible policy, because it seemed to, if you like, give license to individuals and possibly even organised crime gangs to shoplift within certain limits, as it were. And that's the other aspect of this as well, that in some cases, yes, there are organised crime gangs involved, where you see CCTV footage of shop shelves being emptied in one big sweep by large groups of people, which of course shopkeepers are not able to deal with. So I personally, I don't want to see folk being locked up and bunging up our prisons because of what I would generally describe as minor shoplifting offences. Nevertheless, we need to do something about it. So I would like to see the police able to investigate these crimes more rigorously and thoroughly. But nevertheless, detention in prison is not the answer. The Scottish Government have a really good scheme. They launched a partnership against acquisitive crime led by Police Scotland last year, and involves trading standards and retailers against crime. It's a partnership which is looking at prevention, deterrence and enforcement. Bottom line in all of this is that the underlying cause is the issue here, and it's back to this issue of poverty. I feel, Dennis, that there are communities right across these islands which are on the brink. We saw quite recently a riot, I believe it was in Leeds, which was brought about by the intervention, I think, of social services teams removing children into care, but it led to a riot involving petrol bombs. And I don't think that that's necessarily confined to that one community. I'm not saying there's an excuse for it, but I think it's an example of communities which are teetering on the brink right across the country. Would I be surprised if there's a heat wave next month to see trouble in other parts of the country? Yes, it's quite possible, and I wouldn't be surprised because poverty is really at epidemic levels within communities across Britain, and the government don't seem to realise this. And that was evidenced last night when they just refused to lift something that was within their gift, so to do. I know it's going to cost money. It's going to cost, I think it's estimated at between 1.4 and 2 point something billion. But we always seem to be able to find money for aircraft carriers or nuclear submarines or other projects like HS2. So why can't we find money for this? Time to shake the magic money tree, Labour.
Aileen Morgan to become first female Welsh First Minister. Aileen Morgan has been confirmed as the new leader of Welsh Labour and is to become the first female Minister of Wales. Lady Morgan, 57, the Health Secretary in the Labour-led Welsh Government, was the only candidate to put herself forward to replace Vaughan Gething. The Senate, the Welsh Parliament, is expected to be called from recess for Morgan to be appointed as First Minister. Morgan has promised to unify the party after a torrid 4 months during which Gething was caught up in a scandal over donations as he received for his leadership campaign. Morgan has said she will make Hugh Arankit-Davies, who supported Gething's only rival for the job, Welsh leader Jeremy Miles, as her deputy First Minister. Morgan was granted a peerage in 2011 and has sat in the House of Lords and the European Parliament as well as the Senate. The Welsh Conservative leader Andrew Davies described her appointment as a baroness picking up a crown. Gething announced his resignation last week when 4 senior members of the Welsh Government quit. Plaid Cymru has called for a snap Senate election. Its leader, Rhun ap Iorwerth, claimed Morgan's leadership was aimed at stabilising Labour in Wales rather than being in the best interests of the country. When the SNP changed leaders, the Labour Party in Scotland were quick to demand a Scottish general election. However, they do not appear to be so keen for an election in Wales. Seamus, are you kind of on the same wavelength as Plaid Cymru here? Would you like to see an election in Wales? Is that kind of the various democratic way of securing the future in Wales?
Well, there's a number of issues here, Dennis. I mean, first of all, yes, we are very much in partnership with Plaid Cymru, if I'm pronouncing their name correctly. We share a bench with them in the House of Commons, and we also share their ambitions. The context here, of course, is what happened to Vaughan Gething, and that's the latest in a long list of high-profile political figures caught up in scandal. And it demonstrates the need for people like me and others to begin to build trust and rebuild trust in politics. As regards Aileen Morgan's appointment or expected appointment, I'm delighted for her, particularly because she is a woman. She's going to be the first Minister in Wales, and that's wonderful. As Health Secretary, she worked very constructively with the Scottish Government during the later stages of the pandemic, and I wish her well, and I hope that she will join with us in the SNP to push for a better deal from this Labour government.
Kamala Harris and Doug Emhoff face online wave of sexist and racist attacks. As Donald Trump's campaign shifts his focus towards presumptive Democratic nominee Vice President Kamala Harris, the online abuse from the far right has responded in lockstep with racist insults, misogynistic tropes, and anti-Semitic conspiracy theories and viral memes against her. Some of those attacks, common throughout her vice presidency, and are directly targeting her Jewish husband and second gentleman, Doug Emhoff. After Joe Biden's decision to step down as a Democratic candidate and endorse Harris, Republicans as high-ranking as Trump were quick to decry the switch as tantamount to a coup attempt, a dangerous allegation with no factual basis. Among the themes of insults is one of the far-right's most common anxieties, absurd criticism of Harris achieving her succession through sexual favours, an endless attack on her husband simply because he is married to one of the most powerful people in the world. Now, as Harris is poised to have a shot at the potential being the first female US president in history, fresh attacks on Emhoff become the first gentleman have begun. One right-wing commentator called Emhoff the vice president's Jewish handler. Emhoff, who is a lawyer and visiting professor at Georgetown University Law Center, is father to Ella Emhoff, a daughter from a previous marriage that also has come into the crosshairs of the American far right in recent years. Targeted attacks against Ella have been growing since Sunday as the reality of Harris's candidacy becomes more concrete. Donald Trump's campaign has filed a complaint with the Federal Election Commission against Vice President Kamala Harris today, accusing her 2024 campaign of violating federal campaign finance laws by replacing Joe Biden's name with her own to take control of his campaign. The complaint filed by Trump's campaign general counsel David Warrington argued that the Biden campaign could not rename the committee from Biden for President to Harris for President. Once Biden drops out of the race on Sunday and roll over the $91 million Dara Lindenbaum, the Commissioner of the Federal Election Commission, said she agrees with the views that Kamala Harris can access Joe Biden's campaign funds if she becomes the Democratic Party nominee. Seamus, should we kind of be worried about where our politics is kind of heading on a global scale?
Yes, we definitely should. Isn't it a sign of the times that we should be talking about some of this vile, misogynistic and racist commentary that seems to go on various elements of social media? I'm not going to sully this discussion by saying anything about the Republican candidate in the American election. Nothing he does or says surprises me in the slightest. But yes, you're right, Dennis. It is an indication of the extent to which politics has shifted further and further to the right. Here within the House of Commons, we're likely to see defections from the Tory party to the Reform UK. And some of the statements that they've come out with in the last couple of weeks are really quite shocking. And that includes some of the stuff that they're saying in the public domain, but also some of the stuff that I've heard said in private as well. It's truly shocking. I'm attracted to the idea of some sort of legislation during the course of this Parliament, at least, which will force people who wish to have a social media account to register their home address, their email, their date of birth, and some other unique identifying piece of information like a telephone number or perhaps even a national insurance number, so that we can identify individuals who engage in this type of horrific abuse. On the issue of who's going to win the election, at the end of the day, we will have to respect the democratic will of the American people. But I'm putting my cards on the table. I want Kamala Harris to win. I want her to win because she's going to be the first female president of the United States, and her moral compass is so much better aligned than the Republican candidate. Sadly, recent events have shown how dangerous it is for people who are willing to take up public office. And I certainly condemn that act of violence, the attempt to assassinate the Republican candidate. We've unfortunately had examples of that in our own world with David Amos and Joe Cox. And I listened today in the chamber when Joe's sister spoke very eloquently about her legacy. And we must remember that. and we must do everything we can to root out racism, misogyny, and the hatred that we're seeing in our political discourse.
Capitol Hill protests and Netanyahu due to address US Congress. Capitol Hill in Washington is on high alert for a day of protests from thousands of demonstrators representing a broad coalition of groups voicing opposition to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu addressing a joint session of the US Congress. With tension over Israel's 10.5-month war on Gaza running high, police mounted a major security operation to seal off the US Capitol from protesters long before Netanyahu is due to speak around now at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Streets in Washington's downtown area were closed to traffic while officers experienced in dealing with mass protests were drafted in from New York Police Department. The Capitol building itself has been ring-fenced off. Netanyahu's speech, which was arranged 2 weeks ago and instigated by the Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson, is taking place at a singularly dramatic event in US politics. Just days after Joe Biden's withdrawal from the presidential race and less than 2 weeks after a failed assassination attempt on the Republican nominee Donald Trump. Despite the favoured US domestic backdrop, there has been no reduction in furor surrounding Netanyahu, who is considered to be too extreme for many pro-Israel Democrats, particularly for his prosecuting a war that has killed more than 39,000 Palestinians. More than 30 House and Senate Democrats, including Nancy Pelosi, are planning not to attend Benjamin Netanyahu's speech to Congress, according to US media reports. Already today, about 200 people have been arrested at a pro-Palestinian protest in Cannon House, a congressional office building. So, Seamus, what excuse me again. What can we expect from the Israeli Prime Minister speaking to the US Congress?
Well, he's going to continue to justify this completely unwarranted aggression against the Palestinian people. It must end. We've already discussed this to some extent, Dennis. There needs to be an immediate ceasefire. There needs to be recognition of the Palestinian state. There needs to be an end to arms deals to Israel. I mean, it's worth bearing in mind what Bernie Sanders said. I think it was today when he said that this will be the first time in history that someone accused of war crimes will be speaking to the US Senate. Let's remember the context, though, and lest anybody's in any doubt, this is not about the people of Israel. This is about their government, their political leader, and the decisions and the choices that he makes. And that's important to bear in mind, because the people of Israel did bear the brunt of an outrageous and heinous attack by Hamas on October the 7th. And it's always important to remember that. There are two sides to this coin. Nevertheless, as I've said already, there is no, what would you call it, there's no correlation between what happened on October the 7th and what has been happening since on the Gaza Strip. It shames, I think, some in America that Netanyahu has been afforded this privilege, because he is under the cloud of the International Court in The Hague, and it does remain a possibility that he will be formally arraigned there for war crimes. We will see. And so this day may go down in sadly in history for all the wrong reasons.
The Scottish Government announced a £1 million funding to help tackle health inequalities. A Scottish Government programme for improving the quality of the general practice care in disadvantaged areas of Greater Glasgow and Clyde will continue for a second year through £1 million of Scottish Government funding. The Inclusion, Health and General Practice programme aims to provide patients with targeted early interventions, and an evaluation of the scheme showed it had enhanced patient care bolstered staff training and strengthened community links. Over 7,000 extended or outreach consultations were delivered in 2023-24 for patients with complex health needs or those missing from healthcare. More than 200 staff members received training related to the health inequalities, including trauma resulting in improved healthcare delivery for vulnerable patients. Practices were also supported to build stronger connections with community groups. The funding for 2024-25 will support practices to engage in extended consultation, promote staff training, health, equality and trauma. Improvement on experience policies and strengthen connections with community groups. The announcement on a visit. Apologies, we just got a few technical issues. Seamus, I'll bring you in just while we get it sorted. Apologies about that. Can you just go in a bit, we had a little technical issue there. Can you just go in a bit more detail about what the funding is all about and how it will help people across Scotland?
Well, not really, Dennis. I'm not across the detail of this, but I do know that we do need to tackle health inequalities in some of the most deprived communities across Scotland. This is only a start. £1 million will be important for that community. But you've got to look at the big picture across Scotland. And it's not just in general practice. It's in areas like dental health care as well. We've seen evidence this week, particularly of in discussions in the Chamber, of the perilous state of dental care around the UK, and it's no less in Scotland. I'm getting emails in my box regularly from folk who cannot access a dentist, and from others who simply can't get through to their GP practice. I'm really a big fan of trying to incentivise these professionals to stay in the country after they've finished their training. And I'm a fan of so-called golden hellos to try and make it more attractive for doctors and dentists to come to some of the most deprived areas of the country, some of the more remote areas of the country. And it's a remote coastal community that of course, I represent. Dennis, I'm sorry to say, but it's 8 o'clock. I am going to have to wrap things up here at this end. I'm not sure how you're fixed there.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, Seamus. Good to have you on. The Scottish Government opened a £50,000 fund for projects to support Scotland's diaspora. A new fund to help Scotland's international diaspora has opened for applications. The £50,000 Scottish Connection Fund is open to bids from any individual or organisation with a Scottish connection. Whether that link is through heritage, education, business, culture or a broader affinity. Grants range from £2,000 right through to £5,000 and will be awarded to support at least 10 new innovative projects that will help bring Scotland's diaspora and promote Scottish connections worldwide. This year's funding follows a successful pilot last year which supported 4 projects including Work by New York, Geological and Biographical Society to help descendants of enslaved American documents and their Scottish connections. The External Affairs Secretary Angus Robertson said, "The Scottish Connection Framework, which was launched in 2023, laid out our commitment to support and expand this global community. These connections raise Scotland's profile and reputation and encourage individuals and companies to visit, study, live, work and do business here." Well, that's it for this evening. Thank you for joining us. And just before we go, I just want to remind you that Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. Our programme will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 per month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland member. To everyone who has donated and who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, we thank you very much. Right now, we urgently need to increase our donations if we are able to pay our bills. We face costs of £4,000 every month, but our income is just over £2,000 a month, and we're now facing mounting debts. Please donate whatever you can afford. Thank you. Thank you, and thank you to our guest Seamus, who had to leave us just a few moments ago. Goodbye, and thank you for watching.